Hello, I'm Collins Andrews. I'm currently a member of the Executive Committee of the Arkansas Academy of Computing. And today, as part of our oral history project, I have the opportunity to interview Dr. Cecil McDermott. Cecil was born in Parkin, Arkansas, where he graduated from high school. And then he attended the University of Arkansas, majored in mathematics. He earned his master's in mathematics and statistics from Purdue University, and then a PhD in mathematics education from Auburn. He also completed advanced study at the University of Virginia through the National Science Foundation and at Virginia Commonwealth University through the Lilly Foundation. Dr. McDermott established the computer science program at Hendrix University, where he was a professor for 16 years. He also served as the head of the Impact Learning System for its over 20-year life. And IMPACT's an acronym that stood for Instructional Microprocessors in Arkansas Classrooms. A very important, early, very successful effort in instructional computing on a statewide level for Arkansas. Cecil's still involved in leadership positions related to the use of computers in Arkansas public schools, and he advises government both at the state level and a national level. Another area of strong interest, and probably what could even be called a parallel career, is his interest in and his an advocate of athletics, particularly at the collegiate level. Dr. McDermott represented Hendrix in the Arkansas Intercollegiate Conference for 11 years, where he authored major legislation, including the creation of a women's division. So there's lots to talk about today. And Cecil, let's get started. So, but before we get into either computer science education or impact either one, tell me a little bit about your life before computing entered the picture. You know, where were you raised, and tell me a little bit about your parents and their education and jobs and your family circumstances, that sort of thing.
As you mentioned, I grew up in Parkin, and that happened to be the home of David Hanner, who eventually played at Green Bay Packers.
I've heard of David Hanner,
yes, yeah. Yes, and there were several other people in that prominent time too, so as we gathered towards junior high and moved toward junior high and senior high, we had people in that group, some a little older, some a little younger than I was, that are well-known names in athletics in Arkansas. If you go to the Hall of Fame that are set up here in Arkansas, you would see their pictures on the wall and so on and so forth. People like Raleigh and Billy Luplow, the two brothers that were both captains of football teams at the University of Arkansas. And I could go on with that with the basketball program. And so I was a part of an era of 3 or 4 or 5 years, junior high and senior high, in which we were able to beat a lot more teams and beat us. And right. Quite an experience to have and to play against players from other schools who were prominent later.
And so did you play also?
So I played quarterback.
Yeah.
Started all three, every year I played. 2 years of junior high and 3 years of senior high. They were short on quarterbacks. And
well, you're the first quarterback I've had the opportunity to talk to in in this oral history project.
And I had real hopes of college playing, and we had district championships in football and basketball, and enjoyed all of that. But at the same time, I was in school trying to learn, and Clarence Bell, Senator Clarence Bell, was my superintendent, and he was a senator for a number of years and played a major role in the opportunities that I had throughout time. And so the leadership from him and certain teachers, my agricultural teacher, I was interested in engineering, and agricultural engineering was the closest thing that Parkin could see from that. And then Henry Harchie was the person who got me into math and science, and he ended up with a significant career in Florida as a teacher at the university. And then my elementary school principal, who was my 6th grade teacher, who really got me sold on math. And she got me involved in math by doing math bees instead of spelling bees.
Really?
The girls could win about all of those kinds of competitions, so she changed the game. It was math bees. You just throw out numbers or put numbers on the board and calculate and all that sort of thing. So I could do a lot of that in my head. As you mentioned, once I graduated, was well, I was getting ready to graduate from high school, and where I was going was to either Louisiana College or Mississippi College. And I'd been asked to consider a scholarship during my senior year and play quarterback and also play on a basketball team. So I was looking forward to that, and that did not work out because this last game of my career in the finals of the district championship in football, I was unlucky enough to have someone to break my collarbone.
Oh my goodness.
And so
Yeah.
the summer after graduation, then I was recovering from that, and my dad was uncertain, I was uncertain, and everybody else, and my coach and everybody else. But my coach took me to both colleges, and they wanted me, and they just say, we'll sit out a year and we'll do that. But Arkansas State come in and made me an offer. It was one of the first sets of scholarships in the college level. And I wasn't too sure about my collarbone. I wasn't too sure about the size of the people that I saw down at Louisiana Tech and other places too. But anyway, that didn't work out. But the teams that I played with and the players that I played with at Parkin and those experiences really just shaped my life to always strive beyond the last hope. Just never give up. You know, you can be down 55-0, and the coach is still telling you, just keep going, keep going.
Yeah.
That didn't make a lot of sense to me, but something pretty close to that did, because occasionally you'd come back and you'd beat the team, so that helped me a lot. I finished third in my class and went to Arkansas State, and then after 2 years there, I went to the University of Arkansas, and you've mentioned these things, so I won't get into those in much more detail. But there was the different scholarships and different degrees at the different universities. And one of the most significant steps in that line, because all of this was National Science Foundation money back then. And
So what led you to pursue a master's and a doctorate and stuff? What was driving that? And
after the sophomore year, I got the Outstanding ROTC Student Award, which is pretty big at Arkansas State. That kind of surprised me. But I basically wanted to do physics and math and maybe not too much chemistry or biology. And my instructors there, finally one of them came to me and said, look, you need to go on to the University of Arkansas now.
really?
Move.
Yeah.
And so I did. And I wasn't that good a student or that noticeable at that time. But the next year at the university, it all began to happen because I was in the engineering program, civil engineering, and by the end of my second year there in finishing, they had approached me. I don't know why. I never went back and looked to see why that happened, but a person came and said, look, we're short a math teacher in the university school. And it's in mathematics and it's in calculus, and we don't have anybody available to do calculus. Would you teach calculus? So I did. And then from there, I've got phone calls, and because it kind of got around, I guess, at the university and maybe a couple other schools, that I better just focus on that. And Sykes, Missouri made me an offer to teach 2 years and to work on my master's degree and so on and so forth up in that area. And so I did. And once that happened, then it just set in place. Once I got up there and got the experience in teaching and knew I wanted to be a teacher, then I just kept building on it, getting a master's, getting a doctorate, and that's the way the doors opened.
Yeah. What? Then obviously teaching is important to you. What is it about teaching that I guess got your interest and to the point that you were willing to really dedicate part of your life to it?
I stayed with it a long time, up to 1983, from 1957, 1983, and then all the education. And it was the fact that working with advanced students, like 1 year I had 3 students graduate and go to the military academies. That was the first year I was at Sykeston. And then later other things. And as I moved along to Hendrix, the person got a master's or got a PhD. That really fed on itself. The fact that you had bright people who could be successful, and all that's kind of free to you as a teacher, you know. And then you go deeper than that. So you begin to deal with the importance of them having to do advanced research when they're a college student or high school students if I'm working with them. And so that's kind of why it kept me going, and it still does today. I mean, every
Yeah.
chance that I have. Just recently, I had a person came over and invited me to go teach a poetry class of elementary school students.
Oh, my goodness.
And I hadn't
Yeah.
taught a poetry class, for students like that in a long time. And so Nell said, do it. And so I found the right set of poems and got to visited the class and sat and watched them. So all of those things that you do as you advance as a teacher and as you get people excited about learning, as you get excited about it too, you learn at a different level.
Yeah.
And so I've been very fortunate to have that, and so have some great students at Hendrix.
Well, how and when did computing get into the picture for you? Because you were going, looking at the background, it looks like you were going through math and may have ended up a math teacher, but.
It was very slow. There's the slide rule and a surveying instrument. And we had all that stuff at Sykeston, No technology. There was no technology. Then the technology began to emerge. So I was teaching 5 summer institute program and teaching at Hendrix too. 5 summer institute program at Tulane University. They had a mainframe computer, and the micros came in during that era in the late 60s and early 70s. So I began to have the equipment to work with, began to work with the languages and work with students who were learning at that level. So that got me involved with it, and then coming back to Hendrix each year, hey fellas, we got to have this, that, and the other. And we started primarily with its role in technology and problem solving and actually computing things that you don't want to do by hand anymore. So the technology began to play itself. And then the mainframe system was something that I worked with later in terms of actually having a couple people help me to start a computer science program.
Was it typical that teachers who were in math ended up in computing, or how did the leadership of computing in education, where did it come from?
Well, the computing in education, I think, came through basic skills programs in classrooms all over the country. And we happened to be the first one in Arkansas to get involved with the technology in the classrooms and to deal with reading and math and language arts and science and social studies right there on the computer with not near the power. And the key to it was a management system that could manage the software and could test a student and place the student relative to that testing process. That took a lot of time. I had a lot of interest in it and connected up while Clinton was governor and president. He afforded me the opportunity to be appointed to several major positions across the country in the advisory commission and also assist in helping write some of his speeches where it related to technology and related to different things. He'd want to be in sync, he would always say. And he was absolutely brilliant in terms of gathering that kind of information. So kind of an answer to that.
Yeah. How did you end up, I guess the question is, did you ever work in business at all, or did you make a decision between a career in business and a career in academia? And if you did, how did you make that decision?
When I finished in 1983 at Hendrix, I took a 2-year leave of absence. That opportunity didn't come because in that 2-year period of time, I was offered the directorship of the Impact program, wanted me to, with Walter and Mac McClarty and others, and we worked forward then to build a staff of about 40 people. And in that context, then we were using technology in education in schools. And so I was not a technology specialist myself, but I had people that we brought in to do that part of it. But I did know how to work with the software. I did know how to write software. I did know how to write management systems and then hire the people who could put them into practice. So that began to take my interest. A lot of what was going on in the schools was manual labor by my staff. And then you had to have technology specialists in the schools at some point. And teachers had to be trained to how to use that. So that began to be, and then the pay got better as time went on.
Well, what was the, so we certainly want to shift over and talk about this impact effort. What was that, and how did it get started, and what was it set up to accomplish?
Well, Don Roberts was Director of the Department of Education, and he wanted to start a program in technology in schools. And I had probably more experience than most anybody else in school districts and schools, and not at the university level or anything like that, but just the public schools. And I did a lot of consultant work in the schools and lots of states too. And that worked into the place where here is someone who maybe can direct this program. So the commission, John Chamberlain, Walter Smiley, others, we sat down around a table and they offered me the job, and I had provided them with a lot of the information that they needed to select somebody, you know. But they also had their own wisdom. And so we had a board, and there's very little change in that board over time, and they directed the program, and President Clinton helped an awful lot as time went along, and so it just began to fall into place. But it was, the idea was to find the software, select the computers, know how to train lab managers, know how to build laboratory equipment where you can put the computers. And so that began to happen, and so we set a goal of 55 programs in the first 3, 4, 5 years. And the Director of Department of Education, Tommy Venters, came along after that and said, no, you can't do 50. You can't.
Is a program in
he
that
wanted
case
more.
Is a program a school, or is a program software?
A program
in
is,
that definition?
is software in a school with computers, 24 computers in a lab, or there may be groups of 5 computers. So that's when we really get into engineering, technology, that kind of thing, but it's software that's involved in it. And so that's how it got started.
These were high schools, I assume. Is that correct?
No, most of the work we did to begin with, the first 5 years, our goal was to deal with math, reading, science, and social studies in the middle school and junior high school, to change scores. That was the whole idea, was basic skills. And so so I had to track it. I had to come up with my own models and have consultants to come in and check and double check us. But as we begin to build, then they begin to move into the high schools. As they begin to build, there begin to be lots of other. That's when they needed to add staff then. They needed to start dealing with more than just what Impact was doing.
So these were computers that were used to develop basic skills. You weren't teaching computing as such.
No. But we moved into that as a dual role. We had it there. It was easy to handle, handy, and you could do it. And so we did. But what was the pressure to do that? The pressure was brought on bear by the people out in the schools who had been added as technology specialists and staff development people for teachers. And then the high schools began to move in some bigger systems, and they began to have courses in high school. And so we expanded and accommodated that. That also began to be something that Walter and several of us had to think about is, hey, look, this is going great guns. We're going to have high school, elementary school programs and everything else. But they're also adding staff, and they're also wanting to do things on their own, and they're wanting to do things different than what we're doing. So we could see out there around 2000 or so that the schools would want it on themselves. So we also predicted, because I was visiting a lot of other states, also predicted, we thought that we recognized that they would bring in, different kinds of people to do that kind of work and different kinds of programs. And that was fine. So they would want to take over the whole thing. And so we began to make partnerships with Apple and other companies. I won't mention all those names, but they would do contracts with us, and we saved 30-40% on software over anybody else in the nation, because they would test it in Arkansas. So that's some of Walter's thinking. He kind of laid out what you have to do going from basic skills to the ultimate of having just a well-rounded program.
How much overall impact did Impact have in Arkansas schools? How broad was it? How many schools served and students served and so forth?
We did serve our 55 the first go-around, then changed software, hardware, management systems, everything else, and then realized that we'd need to do 50 to 60 programs a year. And then a lot of them would do their own programs, simply to stay away from that connection. They do the same thing we're doing, install the labs the way we're installing them, buy the software from us and everything else. So it made a difference in the basic skills, and continues, by the way, to be its greatest legacy, is that schools are operating out there teaching basic skills with computers. And now you've got the fact that they can do so many different things than they do now. Also, it moved rather quickly to 2 or 3 major school districts, one like Conway, where they just really wanted a computer science program in high school. So as we moved about 2000, 2002, and 3, Phyllis Simon from Conway, and I could name some other names, became the leaders. And so then in the meantime, though, we were sponsoring technology programs for the superintendents and teachers and so on and so forth, and we still do that. And the Impact Fund even is paying for some of that to keep that in place.
Where did the money come from for Impact?
The money came from first of all, from the 15 board members who started up, 15 businessmen who gave $15,000 apiece to start it. And that let us operate for a short period of time. But then Stanley Russ and a couple of other senators and representatives were responsible to try to come up with money from the legislature. And that happened without any difficulty until 1998. Every single year we would get sufficient funding for Impact to do everything we want, expanding everything else. And so we did, and that was successful. Yeah.
Talk a little bit about, you've been involved in computing itself for, for a number of years, and it has evolved significantly. What are the things that you would say are different about computing today, or computing in the decade of the 2000s, as opposed to when you were working with it originally?
Well, I think it might be said that it's sort of like calculus in high school, your senior year, and being able to take calculus 1 and 2 and maybe differential equations. Just awesome what you can do with the technology. So you really just have that technology there and understand it deeper and deeper and deeper levels, and have just less and less control maybe of what you do. The cell phones and all those things coming into play. So this was an era, short and sweet. We could see that coming, so we had to prepare the schools. And as a result, as all that's happening, of course, business and industry was adjusting and changing, and the technology was changing and everything else. We could see all that happening. And so it was good that he suggested it, and he did suggest it, and he stood behind it, and we stayed with him. And so we ended up then with putting it in a nonprofit company. And in that nonprofit company, we continued to work. They just continued to work. But we had to, in order to do that and protect our employees and everything, we had to find a way to do something with the money that was earned. We could pay our employees, but we couldn't just take the money. So we ended up then, when we got everything finished, somewhere around $1.5 million to $2 million, and dissolved the nonprofit and everything. That went into the Arkansas Community Foundation. And the Arkansas Community Foundation then has been investing that money and paying us a dividend of $75,000 or $80,000 a year. And so ever since 2003, and I've served on this committee that makes those decisions for most of the time I've been retired. And that's what we did, and we've now given over $900,000. And so Walter helped us to think through that, and Mac McClarty and some others, and that worked for us, worked for the governor. He was proud of it. And because there were some folks who just wanted to take the money and divide it up among all the schools,
I'm
not
sure,
superintendents, but schools.
Yeah.
But they all backed off of that real quick. They could see the wisdom of it. So by the way, we've given major grants to AETN on 5 different occasions of $25,000 or more over the years. And we did that early on because we were really trying to push staff development. We were really trying to push them taking responsibility in the schools for everything. So I think they still run some pretty good instructional programs here in that area.
Your good friend John Chamberlain, who is also a member of the Academy and also involved in our history project, asked me to be sure and ask you when we had an interview to talk about the role of athletics later in your life, the role of music and the role of poetry, which John would contend that those are all very important parts of your life. And so I would like to hear you discuss athletics and music and poetry.
Well, in athletics, yes, I love sports. I love to run. I love to play football and basketball. But then I also love to run and was a distance runner and got interested in certifying all the AAU courses in Arkansas. And this was way back a long time ago, probably in the late 70s, early 70s. And so the certification requires a bicycle and measuring devices, and you have to do it right. But also ran in the races, and never won a marathon, but and then also ran mile runs, because as a high school miler I ran a 4:53 when I was in high school, and which at that time
Was
state record
significant.
was about 4:37.
Yeah.
You know, so that was a pretty good trip. But never had the chance to develop that talent or anything else. But just enjoyed the athletic parts, but particularly being a part of the AIC and being a part of the athletic program in general, seeing the women come into play in sports and realizing that time is gone. And so I was there in that era, and the AIC is president of that organization,
Yeah.
and worked through that. And so that seems to have gone away. And I enjoyed, it took a lot of time. You know, I had to wrestle with things in my job and in that too, and family, you know, because you have to have time with your children growing up and everything else. And I probably didn't do that as well as I should, because the time just wasn't there, I thought.
What do you think has been the impact at the collegiate level of the expansion of women's athletics? And I guess really I'm asking a question about Title IX.
Well, I just sort of thought the other day about the golf. There's a woman playing golf with all the professional men in some tournament I was watching. And that's very rare. I'm glad that's happening, you know. And then the women, generally speaking, have their own courses and everything else. But this one woman is trying to break in, or wants to break in, or maybe it's not that at all, because it's open, honest. But the women in the schools, I'd say in half the schools through the years that I worked with in any capacity, I felt like they were really just having women who would do athletics. It wasn't about the championship. It wasn't about the title, but it was a physical fitness. It was leadership. It was, and I could see that in the coaches too. But there were always the coaches who was all about winning, and that's probably going to stay that way for a long time. And I think that's natural on both sides for those things to happen. I mentioned one person, Joella Thompson, Sites Thompson, who went to high school with me, was a three-time All-State player on 3-on-3 basketball. She eventually became a tennis player, and has won the women's tennis championship at age levels along with anybody else in the state of Arkansas or the United States. She would not had any of those opportunities, you know, to do that.
Yeah.
So
The in discussions about the computing business in Arkansas that we have done in this history project, we've not talked to anyone who was also a poet and also, I think, played the guitar and also was an athlete. What are all those similar skills, or are you just unique in your kind of dedication to multiple disciplines?
well, in poetry, several years ago, I mean, when I was in Impact, I spent a lot of time away from home, out of state, in state, so I had to find something to do. It wasn't television. So I started writing letters to the editor, and I had 4 or 5 newspapers carry them over time. Always tried to be sensible, and so on and so forth. And then I began to write poetry, and I got some help from 3 or 4 poets to kind of think about structure and so on and so forth. And then over the years, I've written about 5 poetry books, and this is my latest one called Seasons of the Mind, The Awakening of a Weekend Farmer, which refers to one of my poems, and which tells about me being out on my farm and what it was like to be out there, and to go and come and return to it now and then, and to make it something that somebody might want to read. And so then over time, as my different books were published, I decided to, someone suggested, and a company suggested that maybe they would take it and do something with it. was to put all your best together, and that's what I did in this particular book. I haven't written much lately. There's a young lady who is from China. She's now 18 years old, and was a adopted child by a person here in this area. And we spent a lot of time together, my wife and I, with her. Emily is her name. And The Seasons of Her Mind was written with her thoughts in mind. And so she's coming together. It's been a while since we've seen her, next week. And then that class that I taught, I've had some more contact with students there. For those reasons, I did join some poetry clubs, and there's such a variety in it, I didn't feel like that was worth my while or whatever. But,
Who are some people that you have known in your time in Arkansas who were really significant for computing in the state? Who are in, if you were to list a few people who you think really made a difference here in Arkansas, who would be on that list?
Well, I think John Chamberlain and Walter Smiley, you have to start at the top for it to be really important. And the different areas that they were involved in. And all the times I've been with Walter and John, and whenever they had something really important to say and is finding a hard way to say it, they didn't run over people. They really didn't run over people. They'd wait till their moment came, and then they'd finish their conversation. But to have worked with Walter at the time I did at Impact, and Mac McClarty particularly, and to see how different they were, but yet how successful they were, that began to teach me that get me to recognize that I had a style too. So I brought it to my company and brought it to Impact. We sat down and talked. I said, how are we getting along, So we began to do things socially. We began to look at those responsibilities, and it made me grow to the point in thinking like that every single person in that company was important. And and there are Walter Smileys everywhere to different degrees. And I guess that's where it gets back to me in my athletic experience, is that was a terrible time for us in our nation, to have women to go through what they went through for a number of years. And I'm just so glad those things have changed. And I wake up in the mornings and watch the television now with all the things going on in the world,
Talk about another subject that comes up in these conversations frequency is the issue of balancing your life. And really the question relates more to balancing personal versus business, or personal versus academic. How did you manage that? Was that a problem? And what kind of advice would you give to others in that area?
Nell and I, about 4 times a week, get up and go exercise. We've got a gym to go to, and we have a place to run, and so we can do 3 or 4 miles. That's kind of how we start our day. And then I usually go upstairs to my office, and I deal with my finances, anything new come in, anything like that. But somewhere in the day, 3 or 4 times a week, I have to get really serious about my investments. I really have to look at them very carefully. And I'm so pleased with the fact that I have the math, and have the computer sitting there that I can work with. And then also, in the last 15 years, I think we've had 2 brokers, just 2 brokers. And one of them retired and the other took his place. We chose very carefully, the brokers that we had. And so basically just trying to find a day to do some things that we enjoy, and sometimes that's going and visiting friends and so on and so forth, but also getting the important things done that we still have to do. We talk about, I'll be 78 in August, and as we move on into the later years, we continue to talk ever so often. Okay, we need to kind of move this about, move that about. So when I go home tonight, we have that to talk about, because something is going on at our house right now that she's managing that I couldn't be there to manage, a tree being cut. So.
What would you say about looking forward, and really the issue is computing education? I know there is a lot of, really a lot of emotion and a lot of energy dedicated today to the subject of the importance of computing education. I don't know so much about whether we're accomplishing all that we need to do, but what would you say about computing education in the future? What do you think is working successfully now, and what do you think really needs to change?
I would probably take a contract right now to work with a group of people to write a brief history, but a very sound history with the help of the people who would join me on the nature of the universe. And now, what are you asking about?
Well, I'm really asking about teaching computing.
Yeah. What I would say is that we need a history of how to do that. That history would get us to the place and time where you have to deal with the subject is where it is right now. Because so many people already have the answer to that question that don't have the answer to it. See what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
So that would be something I would have an interest working with a group on, or any sort, whatever, is to say, how do you answer that question? How do you get the information that makes a difference in how you teach? So the computer education's obviously starting in junior high school now.
Mm-hmm.
This is pretty much where it's starting, 5th grade through 8th grade. I've got
Mm-hmm.
my sister's daughter who teaches, and that's what she does, teaches them. And they talk about preparing for jobs.
Mm-hmm.
Then you move it on to the high school level, then these community colleges and the programs that they offer, and they're pretty good at it, just
Mm-hmm.
hands-on, this, that, and the other. Now you get more serious about it as you go up the line. All of those things need to be looked at, and some university needs to take on a major grant and deal with that right now before it gets out of hand. And so I'm working on a proposal right now with the various labs in New Mexico to look at, let's give college students, high school juniors and seniors at least, a clear picture of the nature of the universe. So we have actually defined the project. We've got the funding that's there if we want it, and then we have to decide whether it's worth it, what the value in it. So I'd say that would be the answer to your question on both sides.
Yeah, what if you were to talk to, and you probably do talk to students today, what would you tell them? This is kind of the words of wisdom question of what do you think is important to kind of help focus students on efforts that really matter and will matter to them?
I'm not sure I could make a stab at
We,
that.
we're in the academy. We promote computer science education through
Yes.
scholarships.
Yes.
And we have really taken the position that some education in computing and how they work and how to program is important for all students. I mean, we do, I guess, take that position.
Right. The programming part of it.
Yeah. Would you agree with that? And what I guess what kind of background in that area would you advise a student to get today to
Well,
be
the computer
successful?
science field, I was talking to Dwayne Collins recently at Hendrix, and there is a curriculum. There is a curriculum that's well-defined in a liberal arts college,
Mhm.
as opposed to the one down at Morton, for example,
Mhm.
or as one that's pre-preparatory for graduate school.
Mhm.
So that's something that needs to be talked about and dealt with, and I think there's a lot of students who give up pretty quickly when they are juniors and seniors in high school, or
Mhm.
especially as they're going through college, on looking at the different kinds of opportunities there are for them, because they settle for the ones that are just standard.
Mhm.
And of course, one of them is managing companies that have to deal with all of this, like
Exactly.
a Walter Smiley or somebody. So if you're looking for something new,
Or
go out and
working
be a-
in sales, or
Right.
working in marketing in those
Right,
companies.
exactly,
There's so
yes.
many different disciplines in
Yes.
those kind of organizations. Anything else that
about-
you would like to say in this history project before we sign off?
I don't really think so, other than to say that I think what you're doing is important. I think it's significant. I think the archival part of it is enormously important. You put the two together,
Mhm.
and they are somewhat together and separate. but I think it's important to finish that. And I also think you're probably getting to the place now where you've got, when you select people next year and the next year, you're probably getting to the place where it may be 2 or 3 people.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you've got a lot of people inducted, and they've certainly contributed a lot to our state. And now all this work to be done, and that's that gradual process. We found that being the Sports Hall of Honor at Hendricks. I was in that program for a number of years at Hendricks, and 3 to 5 became the magic numbers after 15 or 20 years, you know. And then I don't overlook the opportunities for women in these fields, or how are they holding up, or how are we holding up as men and women that are in business and industry of you know, dealing with opportunities.
Certainly the people in the generation of people in their 60s and 70s who are women who did this went through a whole lot of obstacles that you and I didn't go through, and you're right, those are stories that must be captured.
Well, Paula King Norwood combined the computing and statistics into the things that her company did. You know, she was much more than one dimension. She had that 3 or 4 dimensions to her. And it really comes back, no matter where we go, but a basic, solid education in 4 or 5 academic disciplines, math, science, technology, engineering, physics, those things, is always going to be important. Now the computer's changing all of that, you know, as to how we can get it to play the roles without it taking over.
Right.
Without us becoming robots ourselves, I guess. But it'll be interesting to see that happen.
Well, I think that really is the answer to the question of the advice to students that I asked. I think you did a very good job of that. And,
I've enjoyed you and I talking. I didn't know how this would work out when I got down here in terms of the viability of archival materials, but I really appreciate your professionalism of leading us back to a place, because you had a sense and a feel for what you wanted to accomplish, but also you had a sense and a feel for what you thought I was trying to accomplish. And you pulled me out a couple of 3 times.
Well, Cecil, I appreciate you coming here and spending this time with us.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.